2 mana minions with 2 attack and 3 health are one of the most common stat lines in Hearthstone, and in this list we'll be going over some of the best of these early game staples. And at number 10, we have the Sunfury Protector. Sunfury Protector is a neutral 2 mana 2/3 minion that gives taunt to friendly minions it's played next to. You see, the best way to use this card is not as a regular 2 mana minion, but as a small combo with any large minions you can get on the board, since giving your other minions taunt doesn't really generate any tempo. For those of you who don't know, taunt is a keyword that is very overvalued on certain Hearthstone cards, costing as much as 1 mana on some, when its true value is actually just above 0 mana. Of course, taunt becomes more useful the more your deck loses health, or the more your deck can cheat, as this is where Sunfury Protector found her home. This card saw a lot of play in the early days of Hearthstone and in Classic, an alternative format with just the first set in rotation. This card was used in Midrange Druid, a very popular and solid curve stone deck, and pretty much made Handlock viable. In the early days, with just basic and classic set, many classes like Druid and Warlock were very hard pressed to find any efficient removal or healing for their class, so they had to resort to unconventional means of staying alive against Zoo Warlocks or other aggressive decks by using taunt minions. Midrange Druid aimed to use Sunfury Protector on its medium-sized minions, just long enough so they could play their larger minions and stabilize without being bursted down. Handlock used Sunfury Protector to taunt their gigantic cheap minions to create an unbreakable wall where their opponent couldn't get through. Handlock's basic strategy would be to life tap every turn until they had a massive hand, play cards that synergize with the Warlock hero power, and win with the huge amount of stats they were able to create in the first couple of turns. The issue was, sometimes aggro decks were just too fast and required you to play some cards early on to survive, disrupting your cards that synergize with big hands. Sunfury Protector was so good at stopping early aggression by taunting big minions, that some decks even started adding Ancient Watcher, a huge minion that can't attack, just so they could be taunted by Sunfury Protector. Sunfury Protector has even seen some play recently in Evenlock, a much more powerful tuned up version of Handlock for its ability to still reliably taunt the huge giants it can produce. So despite being among the very first cards ever printed in Hearthstone, it takes the number 10 spot because it saw a ton of competitive success in the early days, as well as seen some niche play in very powerful decks even to this day. However, all the other cards in this list have either seen more competitive play in more powerful metas, or can combo to do more broken things. And at number 9, we have Firemancer Flurgle. This 2 mana legendary Murloc minion is a 2/3 with the effect that every time you play a Murloc, not summon, it deals 1 damage to your opponent's hero and all of their minions. At first, this card may seem underwhelming, especially considering you need other Murlocs in your hand to trigger its effect. When it first came out, it saw some played Murloc Shaman decks in Standard, which were actually quite powerful considering how a new wave of really good Murloc support had just come out. Cards like Spawnpool Forager, South Coast Chieftain, and Lushwater Scout created excellent early game threats that could all later be buffed up with No Fin Can Stop Us, to push for lethal as early as turn 4. Flurgle saw its home as another Murloc threat to play on 2 that could completely shut out some of the swarmy type decks, especially Stealth Aggro Rogue, which dominated at the time. It's worth noting that Flurgle's effect is not targeted, similar to Consecration, so it can kill stealth minions by playing Murlocs without having to wait for them to unstealth. It was only until Wild players discovered a combo that Flurgle really started to get noticed. The combo was simply playing Flurgle and Toxaphene, a 1 mana 1/2 Murloc that gives a friendly minion poisonous, an effect that lets a minion destroy any other minion that it damages. So, since Hearthstone processes battle cries before whenever effects, Toxaphene's battle cry would give Flurgle poisonous, then the game would register that a Murloc was played, and Flurgle's effect would trigger. But since it would deal 1 damage to all enemy minions, and therefore damaging them, they would all be poisoned and die instantly to Flurgle's effect. In essence, this was a 2-card, 3 mana combo, which cleared only your opponent's board and left you with a 1/2 and a 2/3 minion with poisonous, and the ability to do it again. You see, unlike in other card games, there are no effects to stop poisonous from killing your minions, unless they have Divine Shield, making this combo pretty much unstoppable. Also, Shamans have a card called Ice Fishing, which draws 2 random Murlocs for your deck, which means you could just add this broken combo to your hand from 2 mana by not including any other Murlocs into your deck, which weren't very common anyways. Soon enough, pretty much every wild Reno combo or Murloc Shaman was trying to fit 1 copy of Ice Fishing, Flurgle, and Toxaphene into their deck, so they could wipe their board for 5 mana by just playing Ice Fishing. Of course, you always had the chance to draw one of the combo pieces, but it would reliably clear your opponent's board, no matter how big, and also left you with a poisonous Flurgle as a cherry on top. Flurgle is so good that board-centric decks still have to play around the Flurgle combo or just pray their opponent hasn't drawn Ice Fish yet. And at number 8, we have Murkspark Eel. This 2-mana 2/3 Shaman minion beast lets you deal 2 damage whenever you play it, but only if your deck contains only even cost minions. So other than having to build an even Shaman deck around it, this card is just very efficient for what it does with its mana cost. Whenever you want to deal 2 damage to clear your opponent's 1-drop or push directly at your opponent's face, at worst it's a River Croc with an Arcane Shot stapled to it. To put it another way, if this card were neutral and not Shaman exclusive, it would probably be a staple in every even cost deck, and could spawn new even decks just because of how good this effect is at every stage in a match. So what has held back this card from being better than the higher placements on this list has to do mostly with how good even Shaman has been historically and how it fares now, since its limiting restrictions cause it to only be used in specific decks. So how did even Shaman do? Very well. For a pretty long time before Standard was around and after it rotated into Wild, even Shaman was the top dog that every deck was trying to beat. The thing about Shaman is that the class goes through phases where the cards Blizzard prints for it are either complete garbage or meta warping, to the point where it's become a meme within the Hearthstone community. And ultimately, even Shaman was pretty polarizing, mostly because even Shaman at that point had received enough neutral good cards that it didn't have to rely on synergy cards too much to be a very strong deck. As a beast, Murkspark Eel was only there so that it could get its amazing effect off, while the rest of the deck tried to swarm the board with its hero power and cheating out big minions that had totem synergy. And as an interesting side note, this card eventually did get added to the Hall of Fame, Hearthstone's equivalent of a ban list, though not for any reason you might think. Blizzard decided to move all the even and odd cost synergy cards to the Hall of Fame, regardless of if they were good or not, because of how many of the altered hero powers created similar games. However, since its move to Wild, the meta has sped up so much over the years where it can easily be out-tempoed even by the weak modern meta decks of today. And speaking of other even Shaman cards, and at number 7 we have Diligent Note Taker. This 2/3 Shaman minion returns the most recent spell you played when spell bursted, or when a spell is casted for the first time. So basically, this card just adds a copy of the spell of the next spell you cast after you play the Note Taker. This card was kind of just a better version of Electra Storm Surge, a legendary minion which casts your next spell twice. Note Taker had a more efficient body, a premium 2-mana 2/3 instead of a poor 3-mana 3/3, and let you add a copy of a spell to your hand, which actually could be considered an upgrade over just casting a spell twice, even though you did have to pay the cost twice. Playing from your hand meant you could target your spells, rather than hoping for the best, since when spells are cast from a battle cry like Electra's, the targets are chosen randomly. It also didn't matter most of the time, since the spells you wanted 2 of either didn't matter if you cast it twice, like with board clears, or were spells you wanted to target or save for specific threats. So it made sense that a card that went card neutral and copied a spell you really wanted to your hand saw play in all sorts of Shaman decks. So much so that when it was first printed, it actually saw play in some aggressive Shaman decks because its 2/3 body was decent enough to contest the board, and threatened to copy a spell if not killed before its spell burst went off. Most recently, it has seen competitive play in Wild as a value-generating card in Galakrond Shaman, as a way to trigger more invokes off of Invocation of the Frost, or get more copies of the overturned Windpaw Cavern spell. And because its power level is tied to how good the best Shaman spells are, it's likely the Diligent Note Taker will always have some relevance no matter what the meta is. And at number 6, we have the Galaka Crawler. This is a neutral 2-mana 2/3 beast that lets you destroy a pirate and gain +1/+1 when you play it, but has no effect if there aren't any pirates on the board. This is the only tech card, a type of card that very specifically counters certain cards in the archetype, on this list, simply because of how powerful the archetype it counters is. Pirates have a long history of competitive success, but they truly started to become a meta threat when Patches the Pirate first came out. Patches, when he first came out, was a 1-mana 1/1 with charge which could cheat itself out of your deck whenever you played a pirate. So what would happen first in Pirate Warrior is that you would play a good pirate on 1, pull Patches out of your deck for free, and attack into your opponent's face for 1 damage. This may seem fine, especially with how much cheating out of the deck there is in other card games, but in Hearthstone, Patches is the only minion that can pull itself out of the deck for free when you play a minion. It basically gives you a free 1/1, which is huge on turn 1, and thin your deck by 1 card, which in a 30-card deck isn't insignificant. Even though there was a chance to draw Patches, a term coined to mean drawing any cards you wanted to stay in your deck, Patches created its own pirate package that every single aggro deck in Wild has used ever since Patches' release. The chance to draw a pirate on 1, cheat out a 1/1 without charge, and thin your deck is so good in fact, that decks run it even though they have no pirate synergy. Needless to say, pirates have dominated in Wild and Standard since patch's release, so it's no wonder that Blizzard actively had to print Golakka Crawler in an attempt to stop pirates from warping the meta so much. Whenever pirate decks become too common or too good, Golakka Crawler has been a staple tech card that many decks use to try to slow down pirates, by destroying one of their minions and creating a 3/4 to contest the early game board. So even though Golakka Crawler never made competitive decks possible, like some of the other cards in this list, it did serve as a vital and heavily used tool to counter some of the best decks in Wild. And at number 5, we have the Twilight Deceptor. Twilight Deceptor is a 2-mana 2/3 priest minion that lets you draw a card if either hero has been damaged before you play it. This card doesn't seem like it would fit Priest's passive control style, but actually saw competitive success in an aggressive Shadow Priest deck ever since its launch. In the set it was launched with, Blizzard wanted to push an aggro Priest deck, something that people have been trying to make work ever since beta just for the memes, and printed Dark Bishop Benedictus, a minion which, if your deck has only shadow spells, turns your hero power into shadow form, which for 2 mana lets you deal 2 damage. This card was amazing, turning Priest's passive hero power into a better steady shot. Priest also got some of the best aggro cards of all time in this expansion, including Void Touched Attendant, which makes all damage sources deal 1 extra damage, Defias Leper, and Twilight Deceptor. And in Wild, Shadow Priest had accumulated enough aggressive cards from other expansions to immediately be a top meta threat. The plan was to include the Pirate package, which even included Defias Leper funnily enough, Shadow Visions to get extra copies of Mind Blast, and other minions that could cheat out for free. This deck preyed especially hard on combo decks which did nothing on the first couple of turns, since Shadow Priest can snowball exponentially harder than other aggro decks with the help of the Void Touched Attendant. This deck did, however, run out of steam quickly and had very few answers to many cheap board clears, and that's where Twilight Deceptor really shined. With all the damage either your hero naturally takes from its own cards, or from all the damage you're pushing at your opponent, Twilight Deceptor's requirements were really easy to fulfill and gave Shadow Priest just enough steam to quickly finish games. Its premium 2-mana 2/3 body also didn't even lose the deck steam, going card neutral and was the perfect card draw that Shadow Priest wanted. It also saw some play in Reno and Big Priest decks that really wanted the extra card draw, but its requirement was so easy to fulfill in Aggro Priest that it has been a staple in Standard and Wild Shadow Priest. But even though Twilight Deceptor has been great in a deck that has been competitive since its revival, it hasn't been around quite as long as some of the next cards on this list. And at number 4, we have the Arcanologist. This 2-mana 2/3 mage minion simply has the effect to draw a secret from your deck when you play it. This card has pretty much seen play in every mage deck that wants to play secrets, even if they're only running 2. This card may seem broken, which it is, but what kind of balances this card is the fact that most secrets lose you tempo when you pay for them or are overcosted for what they do. Mirror Entity is a prime example, where the first minion your opponent plays on their turn gives you a friendly copy. When played optimally, Mirror Entity could give you a huge minion by mistake, or force your opponent to not play the big minion that they've been saving up for. But if they're smart, they'll just play one of their small minions first, giving you a copy of that, and going into their regular turn as normal. And that's the problem with Mage Secrets especially. You can pretty much play the cheapest minion or spell from your hand to test for any secrets, and get away with little more than a slight inconvenience to your normal turn. Of course, there are times when your secrets will gain value for just existing, but that only happens when you can play a bunch of them at once. And that's exactly what Secret Mage did, an aggro deck which aimed to cheat out most of their secrets for 0 mana, with Mad Scientist and Cabal Lackey, and use all the good mage cards which synergize off of those secrets. This deck had it all: cheap board clears, amazing burst damage, huge cheap minions, and by far the best draw any aggro deck has ever had. In fact, this deck was so dominant for so long in Wild that people really thought it would become off meta because of how good all the cards were. This deck, like other Wild decks, basically got 1 new support card each expansion, and Secret Mage was among one of the first archetypes that got enough good support. It's worth giving an honorable mention to Medivh's Valet here, another 2-mana 2/3, but unlike Arcanologist, hasn't seen play in decks other than Secret Mage or Reno Secret Mage. No, Arcanologist has another function, fetching Ice Block, one of the best cards of all time I might add, to your hand from your deck. And so many mage decks at one point wanted to play Ice Block that Arcanologist was included just so you were more consistent at drawing it. And at number 3, we have Farwatch Posts, which actually was even more powerful as a 2/4 before it was nerfed. Farwatch Posts is a 2-mana 2/3 neutral minion that can't attack, and makes each card your opponent draw cost 1 more mana. So, whether your opponent naturally draws cards or uses card effects, it will make all of those newly drawn cards cost 1 more, but not more than 10 mana. And despite looking innocent enough, this card is actually one of the only floodgates in the game, printed nearly 7 years after Hearthstone's launch. You see, unlike in other card games, there are very, very few ways to interfere with your opponent on their turn. Hand traps, floodgates, and counters simply aren't printed that often, so you can pretty much only interact with your opponent during your turn. Of course, there are secrets, minion floodgates, and weird counter spells, but again, they are the exception to the rule and not the norm. So it makes sense, as the more powerful a card game gets, the more you want to limit the resources your opponent has to do powerful things. Farwatch Post has seen play in so many control and combo decks that it's hard to name all of them. And what makes it great is that it screws with aggro decks and combo decks, usually the two best types of decks in Hearthstone. Equally well, since aggro wants to play their naturally drawn minions for cheap, and combo wants to draw a lot of cards. It also just slows down the game, since your draws will be unaffected, but creates a must-kill 2-3 on the board that, if left unchecked, can pretty much win you the game with the amount of mana advantage it creates. This card may not have been around as long as some of the previous entries in this list, but when it was played, it was in more decks and saw play in much higher power-leveled formats. And at number 2, we have Ship's Cannon. Ship's Cannon is a neutral 2-mana 2-3 minion that randomly does 2 damage to an enemy whenever you summon a pirate. And what's really important about this card is that it triggers whenever you summon a pirate, in addition to whenever you play one. And like I've mentioned in this video already, the pirate package has been played in almost every aggro deck ever since its release, and Ship's Cannon is part of what makes it so good. The best way to play this card is to save it and 1-mana pirate until turn 2 or 3, play the cannon and pirate, summon patches from your deck, get 2 cannon shots, and hopefully kill 2 of your opponent's minions. We've already talked about Murkspark Eel, which deals 2 damage once, and how good of an effect that was. Ship's Cannon has the potential to do it twice when played from your first pirate, and continue doing it with each other pirate you play if left unchecked. And in Pirate Warrior especially, this card, if played on turn 2 with no answer, will win the game for this deck, since they can play multiple pirates per turn to either push massive damage to your face, or clear all of your minions for free each turn. Again, it's worth stating how this card, which has the potential to miss all of your opponent's minions, or be a dead card when you draw with no pirates, was still played in nearly every aggro deck since Patches was released, even with at most 5 other pirates, because of how game-winning and snowbally this effect is. And what really speaks to its power level is that Blizzard has recognized the power of Ship's Cannon and made alternative versions of the card with the same effect, and all of them are amazing. It's just that Ship's Cannon was the first, cheapest, and one of the best pirate support cards of all time. And at number 1, we have Dark Glare. Dark Glare was originally a Warlock 2-mana 2-3 minion that after your hero takes damage on your turn, you restore 2 of your mana. To put it simply, this card is probably one of the best cards of all time to ever have been printed and enabled multiple Tier 1 and Tier S decks in its lifetime. You see, one of Warlock's core themes is self-damage, so they already have a ton of good competitive cards to take advantage of its effect. And Dark Glare's effect is definitely worth building a deck or package around, since restoring mana is one of the best effects you can have on a card. Any card that can cheaply cheat out mana, that is get a mana for free or get effects or minions for cheaper than what they should be, have been very troublesome, and Dark Glare was no exception. The combo with Dark Glare was to basically play it and any cheap card that damaged you, since any card that costs 2 or less would be free or restore mana. For example, you could play a Tour Guide on 1 and get 0 mana hero power, play Dark Glare on 2, life tap to get a card for 2 free mana, proceed to play all the cards in your hand, and most of your deck slam multiple giants down and end your turn. The only thing that made this deck somewhat balanced was that it was extremely difficult to pilot optimally, especially with how low your hero's health could be, but it soon became clear how broken this deck was in the hands of a master. This card was so good that it created its own prefix, creating Dark Glare Warlock, Dark Glare Zoo, and Dark Glare Questline Warlock, even after being nerfed twice to be a 3-mana 3-4 that only restored 1 mana. And yes, at one point it helped to make Questline Warlock probably the most powerful deck of all time, skyrocketed to consistency of around 60% win rate, even after being nerfed twice. This card was on a whole other level, and it really helped with just how well the whole deck synergized with each other. The Warlock questline pretty much just required you to damage your hero with your quest reward, Blightborn Tamsin, making all damage you take damage your opponent instead. This just incentivized the deck to have more cheap damage cards that you could spam out for free with Dark Glare, and eventually caused Blizzard to step in and just gut the entire deck. Pretty indisputably, Dark Glare deserves to be number 1 spot on this list because of how long it's been dominant for, and for the sheer number and power of the decks it's been in and helped to make. Alright, and that's the video. If you know of any other great 2-mana, 2/3 minions that we may have missed, or have ideas for future videos just like this one, I'd love to hear about them down in the comments.